Day 256 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another quick update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine today. And as always, I'll start off with the Russian military losses as of the 6th of November 2022. So in the last 24-hour reporting period, we're looking at 75,930. So if we go back a day, we'll see that's an additional that's actually about 490, about 500 thereabouts in terms of Russian military personnel losses. Again, bear in mind, this is an approximation assessment by the armed forces of Ukraine, and it just gives us a bit of a look and feel of the exhaustion of those Russian forces. Then we'll take a look at the armored combat vehicles, so 10 losses there on the Russian side, tanks 7, and artillery 5 losses for the Russian forces. Then we'll move back to the map, and I might firstly change to the topographical, and we'll start out as we sometimes do in the Russian region. So a building is on fire in the central Belgorod Oblast region. The reason is unknown, perhaps caused by internal Russian dissidents taking out an empty conscription office overnight, as they're wising up to the fact that they're just being used as cannon fodder. But there is never any shortage of things happening just above the Ukrainian border in the Belgorod Oblast. Then we'll move across to the Donbass today. So Russian forces continue to transfer mobilized units to the Svatove area in an attempt to fill the gaps in their defense. And in the Svatove axis of fighting, lines have been modified from what we see on the map here. So if this map were allowed to update in real time, you'd see a big grey push in favor of the Ukrainian forces. I'll use the ruler to identify this for you, but basically from north of the P66 highway down to the intersection to Svatove and even further down. So at the moment, as you can see, it's red, so it does say on this map that it's Russian occupied, but really it's technically actually much more of a grey area. So a grey area as a push in favor for the Ukrainian forces. Oh, and also in this region, so the railway bridge that leads to Luhansk, which was taken out by Russian forces. Now, this is what this photo is. And I can all but confirm at the moment, this is the railway bridge over the Krasna River in this region here, as it pushes on the way to Svatove. But either way, the outcome and symbology are the same here, because we have the Russian forces who came to invade, but are actually using some defensive tactics here instead. So not a good look for Russia. And then moving slightly down on the map, some really big news that happened a few days ago, but was only confirmed very recently from both sides. So on the 2nd of November, an entire Russian battalion made up of newly mobilized Russian conscripts were wiped out near Makivka, right here. So it was said that the commanding officers ran away, which they usually do. Now, out of these 570 Russian troops here, only 29 survived, and of those, many of them were injured. So that's really some World War I level casualties there. And then we'll move down a bit further to, so the Bakhmut region, always a heavy fighting area there. So we can zoom in now. And not a lot of change really as of the last 24 hours. If we do pull up the date map here, you will see that there has been a change in the positive direction for the Ukrainian forces there. But I believe this is actually something more of a map clarification as opposed to a push from the Ukrainian side. Then we'll move a bit further down to, it is the settlement of Voriane. There we are, so there we go. So it's been reported Russia is stuck here and unable to advance. But really, are we surprised? I mean, look at this map. Because just like a household cat, the Russian forces typically have an aversion to bodies of water as well. And I'll show you, we'll go to the right and it's basically consistent there. The only reason why they've been able to overcome the river in the easterly direction here is because they've been taking it on horizontally or from a parallel perspective there. So they didn't have to contend with it whatsoever. Then we'll move a bit further down to Zaporizhzhia. Okay, so more of a news piece here for this one. The nuclear power plant, as we know, at Enerhodar, right there. So the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which was offline for 2 days as a result of Russian shelling, has now been reconnected to the power grid. It's believed one of Russia's goals, or options at least, for this plant is to later connect it to Crimea and Russia for power instead. And you do get a lot of Russian or pro-Russian enthusiasts that say, you know, why would Russia shell an area that it occupies? Why would it shell the nuclear power plant? Well, more specifically, it is the power lines there. So if they cut them off successfully and then they reroute the power, it's a no-brainer, really. Then we'll move across to the Kherson region, the other front line here, where it seems the Ukrainian armed forces are preparing to build up in the Kherson region again. Oh, plus there's virtually no rainy weather for the on the 10-day weather forecast in this region, which makes it ripe for a counter-offensive or at least a few extra liberated settlements, villages, maybe even the remainder of the north bank of the Dnieper River here. Because little to no rain means there is a low risk of muddy plains, which would typically otherwise slow down any military offensives. Also, a fire was visible in the Kinburn Spit area. So this is almost like the peninsula up here, obviously Russian occupied. Now, we know that Russian forces have been setting up shop in this region, really on the edge of it this photo is from. So now it's been said that the Russian forces were attempting to lodge a small Iranian drone from here as well, but probably not anymore though. And we'll just scoot back to the North Bank here for a moment. So Russia does definitely seem to be planning to fail on the North Bank here. Or I should say it a bit more diplomatically, planning for the event of failure here instead and the need to fully 100% withdraw. Because, for instance, take a look at these fresh 3-day-old satellite photos of Russian trenches. Now, these have been set up in Kakhovka, Petropavlivka, the Biosphere Reserve Area, and Hola Pristan, areas all of which are on the south side of the Dnieper River. And note, with this imagery, satellite imagery, you can identify the trenches basically by the white lines running through these photos. But some of these are not the best trench designs, as you'd prefer trenches to have a more pronounced and safer zigzag design than the likes of some of these. And then also in some more indications of the Russian forces leaving the North Bank. So Russian forces have ravaged and abandoned an administrative building in Kherson City, which should still be de facto occupied by them. They're a messy bunch though, hey? But, you know, perhaps they were just in a rush to withdraw. Then we'll move across to some news for the day. So in this recent video, we have the Belarusian president, Lukashenko, seeming to appeal to his constituents. So he's saying things like Ukraine is not an independent state, Belarus is implementing its allied agreements with Russia. He also said he doesn't want to send the military to Ukraine, but he basically will if he has to. So it looks like he's trying to get the general population of Belarus on board with a potential military escalation. And I do feel like this is actually the first Luka monologue of about 3 Luka monologues whereby he preps his country for some type of military action. And I've said it many times now before for many reasons, but for the small nation of Belarus, it would be a mistake for any Belarusian aggression in Ukraine. Then we'll move across to some more news. So the Iranian foreign minister re-acknowledged that his country had provided drones to Russia. So confirmed that he has, but claimed that it had happened before Russia's full-scale invasion. I actually like the language coming out of this foreign minister here, and I'm hopeful. Because using this very carefully crafted language, like he seems to have used, it would be a clever way for Iran to remove much personal responsibility for the drone attacks on Ukraine. Because he's saying that it was sent before the war began. They didn't necessarily know which country, if at all, it would be used for. It was, perhaps expected to be only used for defense of Russia, not an offensive, by contrast. And all of that whilst at the same time alluding to the chance outcome that you won't see any Iranian missiles used by Russia in Ukraine as an ipso facto result to what he's saying. But we'll still, see what happens. And in some more news, so EU countries have transferred over 500 electric generators now of varying sizes to Ukraine to reduce the fallout for wintertime Russian missile strikes that could affect the Ukrainian power grid, leaving citizens without power. And having said that, many Ukrainian cities, including the capital, have backup evacuation plans now should they need to relocate their populations, depending on which cities have been struck particularly bad and have a loss of that energy infrastructure needed to keep the lights on and the warmth in the winter. And then moving on, we'll move across to another mobilization blunder. So in this video, we have wives, mothers, daughters, sisters, and relatives of recently fallen mobilized Russian soldiers those soldiers from Makivka. And that's the massive Russian battalion group I mentioned just earlier in the video. So the direct Russian relatives are asking their government to send back their loved ones dead or injured. So there's actually a lot of Russian video pleas like this happening now. This is by no means an isolated incident. It's sort of like a change of the state of consciousness of the Russian population because, for example, first off, before the war and at the beginning of the war, a lot of Russians were sporting the Z symbols everywhere on their clothes, cars, everything like that. Then the partial military mobilization came, and a lot of Russians ran for the borders, flew to other countries to get out of being conscripted. And following on from that, the ones that were conscripted and sort of stuck and had to go to war, they made a lot of videos from near the front lines or when they're just about to go to the front lines, making pleas for basic necessities. We are talking sleeping bags, we are talking logs to make trenches, just a whole bunch of things that you would think would be supplied by a military for a successful military offensive campaign. But no. So we started with overwhelming support. We're now seeming to have the population in Russia move a little bit more towards pleas to their government. Please do this and that. And the next step would look probably something closer to, the beginning levels of a rebellion of the from the citizenry of Russia and the military citizenry of sorts against the established political class. So, like I say, the state of consciousness, I believe, is starting to change slowly but surely. This could take days, weeks, years, who knows. But one thing is, when it actually happens, when the scales tip, it just seems like it happens all of a sudden, just like the fall of the Soviet Union back in the early 90s. And then just a bit of a funny to run it off with today, guys. So in this photo, we have, so this was in Kherson City. Retreating Russians looted everything of value from every restaurant, hospital, store, anything they could get their little Red Star hands on. And this photo here, it's the restaurant Palazzo. And so they said even light switches, sinks, and, you guessed it, toilets all looted as spoils of war for Russian military people taken back to Russia. But here's what I think is an interesting kicker or side note to this. So, effectively, really only the wounded are carried out of the war zones and taken back to Russia. So I feel like one day the Ukrainian forces in the not too distant future are going to liberate some territories and find a bunch of warehouses where a whole bunch of porcelain gods, aka toilets, have been temporarily relocated to, but never actually taken back to Russia. Because Russia is sending a lot of humans, a lot of troops, a lot of manpower to Ukraine on the front lines, but at the same time, even though they're sending lots, for hundreds and hundreds of thousands, they have a manpower problem. So if you're on the front line, you're not leaving. You're staying there until you are, I guess, a fallen comrade. So yeah. So, yeah, not great stuff. But that's pretty much it, guys. So, yeah, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.